when it comes to esports, something I've based my entire career around, my entire philosophy is focused in on, tunnels in on, is trying to understand the context of something. Not just looking at what happened, appreciating what happened, but appreciating the context of why this is meaningful. What's important? How does it refer to things in the past? How will it set up future storylines and narratives in the future? What makes this important? What is it about the circumstances which led to this act happening now, which allowed it to happen, which took us from point A to point B through to point Z at the end? Context is everything. It's what makes the great moments great. Not because it hypes them up and artificially tells you this is great and you have to watch it and wow, this is going to be so cool. It makes them great just by showing us the reality of why they're great. Showing us what allowed that greatness to occur. How greatness came from something less great. How simplicity is brought up through progression into complexity. You can reduce any game or any sport into something that'll sound, just in words, very small and very meaningless. If someone tells me that they're a huge fan of football and they love the play of Messi or someone, I could just say, oh well, who cares about like a small guy from Argentina kicking a leather ball into a net. And someone just, I mean, the net's huge and the guy who's guarding it's small and he just kicks it into one of the holes. Like, who cares? Anyone could do that. Like, if you do that, you take everything away. You take all the context out of it. You make it into just this one simple, which is accurate to some degree in terms of what's happening, the action of just kicking this little ball into a goal. But then if you know the context that the guy who's guarding the net, he's one of the best in the world at his position. He's trained his whole life and watched game film of the guy who's trying to score and learning how to dive against him and building up his athleticism to be incredibly difficult to get the ball past. And then he has a defensive setup in front of him who are keyed in on how this attacking player is going to play and how they're going to defend against him and where they're going to lead him away. And then as a result, he knows where to load up on which side of the goal to go over to because he's got defensive players guarding over here. All this context. And then the fact that normally short players aren't the best in football. They aren't the ones who tear people apart because they can be pushed around and they can be fouled easily and they can be bullied off the ball and maybe they can't get to balls that are higher up. They have to use their head, etc. for. The taller players would have the advantage there. There's all these aspects. And then in terms of speed to get past defenses that know that you're coming and then to be able to use incredible skill to get the ball past, to trick the goalkeeper, to hit shots that despite being incredibly athletic and one of the best goalkeepers, he can't even get to because it's such a skilled shot. And as a result, even though the goal looks big, the context is the area where you're really aiming to get past your strike zone is going to be very small. It takes a lot of skill and years of training and natural brilliance and developed talent to be able to do that. When you add on all this context, what seemed very simple and meaningless becomes special. I always say, here's an example, okay, to show you the power of context on the mind, to understand that something's amazing that otherwise, without the context, with it stripped away, would seem fairly meaningless. So in football in Europe, we actually have a sort of unnatural stage set for us when it is the big moment, when even the world signals to us that this is the key moment. Because when we have these huge finals, well, in England, for example, we used to always have like the big cup final be in Wembley Stadium, and the idea was Wembley Stadium isn't a football ground of any specific team. It's not used for any team's home games every week. It's only used for big concerts, huge matches, like when England play, they would play there. This is like, so if you play in the big final there at Wembley, you know just by going into Wembley, if you're a fan or someone watching it or you're a player, like this is important. This must mean I'm in a big stage now. This is important. But what's interesting is in the NBA, they don't have that. They don't have a big stadium that everyone goes to. In the NBA, you play the NBA Finals games, the most important stage of the whole tournament that impacts on your whole legacy and career and how great a player you are, in either your stadium, your home games, or the opponent's stadium. Now, these are stadiums that you're playing in minimum 2 times a year if it's the opponent's, or 40 something games in your own stadium, or if you play them in your own conference, you might play 4 times in their stadium. So actually, getting to the NBA Finals, you've already played in that guy's stadium before. But you haven't though, have you? Because you've never been in an NBA Final. When it's in the final, we all know it means more. We know how hard it is to get to an NBA Final. We know the kinds of teams you probably had to beat. We know you might have sustained injuries having to go through these 7-game wars with people. We know that once you play in the finals, people tend to choke more. The pressure's more, the cameras are more, the lights are more. It's not the same as just playing in that same stadium before. Even if it seems like the same amount of people, they're going to be more naturally excited. They're going to know everything means more. Every action is scrutinized more. It's not a throwaway game. It's not just to affect the standings. This is to win the championship, to be remembered as the best team that year, to be immortal in a sense, to have this legacy that a regular season game doesn't have. When you add in all the context, we know that it's important. And yet technically it's all a mindfuck. Technically it's still the same stadium. If they could think that way, maybe players would be more free when they play in that sense. But the context, they know the context and it gets them and it has the effect it should. Likewise, I've been around so many esports events where I've gone to the event on day one before it's opened, as in day one that I arrive. So the day before the event, and I go in there and people are putting up the scaffolding and making the event. And you know what? It's just a hall. It's just a big hall. In the past, it used to just be the ballroom of a fucking hotel that was like a 3-star hotel. Who gives a fuck? But once you create the setting, and once the players come in, and once those matches go live, and you know that this is an important match, and this is offline, it's not online anymore, the pressure's there, if you win here, you're going to advance to the playoffs, and this team's never been past the semi-final, then this team makes it to the final, and then they're champions, and will the underdog defeat them, or will they continue their legacy, making this dynasty of teams that have won tournament after tournament after tournament, and it's going to be $100,000 for this match. It's not just any match on those PCs, even though earlier on, similar teams played a similar looking match from the outside, but now $100,000 is on the line, and if you win, it means so much for your legacy. The context builds up. But what's interesting is if you're in the production thing, you get to see the other side as well. After the event, the teams go away, the confetti's cleared away, all the checks have been given out, the crowd leave, it's just an empty area again. People are guys cleaning up, like a cliched, like one janitor guy cleaning up, then people are taking apart the stage, and suddenly it's just an empty room again. All the context is gone. Yeah, it's nothing. It's just a room, and people put up some PCs and played some games there. But they didn't, did they? We know the context is important. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this out is because when you want to tell the stories, as I've often sought to and striven to tell within my historical articles, either histories of teams or profiles of what a player's like and his philosophy and the way he plays the game and the things he's accomplished. The reason why context is so important to me in setting up an honest context, not just one that plays to a cool story, but finds the cool story in that player's life that was real, is because mainstream journalism repeatedly comes into esports and is dishonest in the way it deals with these narratives in this context. Because these mainstream journalists come in and they time and time again survey the scene, and then they think to themselves, right, well, this is just like a competition to see who the best player is in Counter-Strike in this tournament, which it isn't, but that's the way they'll phrase it, or the best team is. So that's just a bunch of 18-year-old nerds playing computer games, and someone gets to the score that wins you the game, and he wins the game, and that's it. So, no one's going to read a story about that, man. There's nothing here, right? What I'm going to have to do is, I'm going to have to insert a narrative over the top. I'm going to have to get predefined narrative structures that we all know of how stories work, like underdog versus favorite. And I'm going to have to put that over the top of these teams playing, and I'm going to create the story. That it'll look like I'm telling the story of this, but actually I've got my own story I'm going to tell within the vehicle of this. And it's condescending because it assumes that there aren't already incredible stories out there. And the reason why they assume it is because they haven't looked deep enough to find them. We have stories, if you know the context and you've done your research in esports, that are better than movie scripts. If you saw some of these details in movie scripts, you'd be like, that's too perfect. Whoever wrote this script is like brilliant. Or even worse, some of them are so crazy, the storylines, that you'd actually be like, wow, whoever wrote that's a hack. Like, that's so lame. Or, so the guy who does this, his nickname was this, and then eventually he won the championship in that way. Like, come on, as if that would really happen. I'll give you some examples, okay, to show you the power of context, why context matters, and where these real stories exist in esports that are brilliant, as good as a fucking Christopher Nolan scripted movie. Though admittedly, Jonathan Nolan did the scripting in most of the best ones. So one of the areas where this came up, where it made me really think about it, was there was a guy who was some sort of like New York Times bestseller author who came in around 2006, I think it was. And he wrote this book about Team 3D, this is in Counter-Strike 1.6, Team 3D versus Complexity, Call. So it was 3D versus Call, and they were the two best North American teams at the time. And they had a rivalry. So the book was going to be about the rivalry. Now I thought to myself, great, he's going to travel with them for a whole year, he's going to talk to them, do interviews with them, and he should be able to uncover the proper stories if he has this talent and he has some skill. But instead what he did was just layer these lame narratives over the top and look at the scene and go, oh, there's not really that many stories here. So just make up his own fucking stories. And it was terrible. Like, he set the stage as though, okay, 3D, they're like the New York Yankees. They're like the big city team, and they're the established ones who've won everything, and they're on top right now. And then this Complexity team comes up, these plucky underdogs, these sort of like Hicks from the sticks, who are going to the Big Apple, and they're going to try and compete for the championship. And they're going to hope that they can beat these legends, and they can win. Now, the problem with that was, none of that context fit, was honest, or was accurate, or was even interesting compared to what really existed there. So at the time of the two teams, remember, he built 3D as the New York, the dominant ones, and Call with the plucky up-and-comers. Except this was 2006. In 2006, Complexity were the better of the two teams, domestically and internationally, Complexity had actually been briefly the best team in the world in 2005 when they'd won ESWC, the Esports World Cup, the biggest tournament in the world at the time, the main major. They'd won that. They were the best team in the world. They were established. They were the dominant team who'd had these 2 offline seasons in Cal Invite, where they'd gone undefeated, never lost a game. They were the dominant team. Meanwhile, 3D was the team that had a bunch of skilled players and a bunch of names. Yes, they had some established names, but actually they'd been lagging at these big international tournaments. They'd place like 9th, or they'd maybe crack a top 8. That's it. They weren't in any sense better than the other one or dominant. It'd been years since they'd won big championships, meaningful ones, not like in fucking Source and CZ and all that bullshit at WCGs. They were the ones flagging. So first of all, he got that totally wrong. Then you look at these players, and remember the up-and-comers who want to go against the legends? Well, that's great, except these players were all peers of each other. In fact, 4 of the players on these 2 teams, so Volcano and Dominator, Siva as he was sometimes called, in 3D, and Sunman and Storm had all played for the exact same... These 4 players had all been part of the same team the year earlier, early on in the year in 2005. Let me think... No, 2004, they'd all 4 of them had been members of the same team, TSG, the Stomping Grounds, together. They'd come up together, and now they'd both gone into better teams. 2 of them had gone into Complexity, 2 of them had gone into 3D. Other players, Fraud had always been known as one of the best players. In fact, he was the best player in the world for a brief period of time, arguably, or the most effective. Meanwhile, 3D didn't have a player who was comparable to Fraud at his peak, so this was all skewed and it was all off. And yet what's interesting is there was a great narrative there he could have told. There's a real story of this lineup that linked the 2 together in a way that's like a fucking movie script, was that Team 3D was the established team. They'd existed as a team since way back in 2002 when they'd won their first championship. What they'd done was, in their team, they'd originally formed their team out of just really skilled players who used to dominate the scene individually. So they'd made this individual skilled team, they'd gone to a LAN and they'd failed. They finished 17th to 24th. Meanwhile, one of the guys in there who'd previously been in their team before, X3, had said, this isn't the way we've got to do it. Like in the new era, we have to use tactics and team play. He'd gone and made a team of not very skilled players, TSO, and he'd actually done better than them at this next event, where they'd finished 17th. He'd finished in, I think it was, let me think, I think he'd finished 4th place. No, 5th place. He finished 5th place, and he managed to go close with the top European teams. He managed to beat out other North American teams, and he'd done it but without the skill. And so what happened now was, because he hadn't quite made it to the top, even because he didn't have quite enough skilled players, and they hadn't made it because they didn't have the tactics and they had the skilled players, they made a super team. And now the super team, in their first big event, won the big CPL. Wasn't technically their first event, but the first big major. They won a major. Well, it wasn't even the first major. It was the second major. They won a big major. And then after that, they fell into this rhythm where they would only recruit the most skilled player they could. So every time they had a bad result, like 13th place, because they had a lot of money in salary, and it didn't actually matter if they won the event. They had all the sponsors and the attention. They were famous. They'd go, they'd practice a bit. It wouldn't go well. They'd just kick the worst player. They'd get in a really strong player. And time and time again, they kept doing this approach, and it never got them big championships. Yes, in CZ and Source, they won in these one-off WCGs, but in the 1.6 tournaments, they were finishing 13th and 16th and bombing out in like terrible placings, losing to teams at CPL Spain, getting upset all the time at these big events. Meanwhile, this Complexity lineup came along. And their players had been in good teams before, but always sort of the 2nd or 3rd best US team in general. And they'd had some good results, like they'd have a 7th here or a top 4 here, but they weren't quite there. And what they did was they got these players who were talented players, but who weren't necessarily all the star names. And they made this team together, and the team wasn't as skilled as the Team 3D team. Man for man, the Team 3D team was much better. But they had a team that was willing to practice heavily, that based their game around team play, and having one major star and basing the game around him, but the rest of the people team played off him. And they put a lot of emphasis on tactics and having good tactical style. And the in-game leader, Trip, took some of the tactical style of Hare before him, and he implemented it in his team. And he saw how he'd used it before, and now he had some better players, or better players for their roles. And they came up playing the right way, and they became world champions. Meanwhile, the other team that had all the talent and continually had a talent mismatch wasn't winning the right way. If you set it up that way, it's a story about philosophies. It's a story about players who aren't the established star, but who figure out how to make their teammates better, how to find a contributing role within a top team. And maybe they're not a world championship level player, but within their team's a world championship team. And it's the team that's lazy and has all the money and practices a bit and says they want to win but won't do everything. And the team that has to be the band of players who come together as a team, and they work their way to the top, and they battle their way up, and they build something up, and they don't just rely only on skill. This is a great narrative. Again, let's talk about some other narratives from esports. So another example I've used in the past is the story of Doublelift. What I'll do with this is I'll show you pure context. I won't tell you anything about League of Legends, the game, or champions he played or specific things he did. I'll just tell you as if I was a mainstream journalist and I'd actually done my homework and I'd gotten to the bottom. And you'll see what a fucking brilliant story this is. So there's a young boy whose family are immigrants from China, and he's like grown up in America though, so he's very Americanized. He's not very much of a Chinese person. And within this background, this harsh, first generation immigrant type family, they're very demanding. They demand a lot of respect, but he's a young American kid. He's from the West Coast or whatever. So I don't know if that's actually accurate. Whatever, I think he is. So he's from the West Coast. He's got that sort of like, naturally somewhat independent, individualistic streak to him, a little bit disrespectful compared to the harsh Confucian cultures we know from the East. And so he never really gets along with his parents. And one of the points of contention is he's a super massive gamer. He wants to play a lot, slack off on school a bit. Anyway, over some issue that's just a very small issue in terms of like what to us would seem like a small issue, but it's a big issue in terms of the family. They have a disagreement and he's sort of kicked out and he decides he's going to just leave. So he goes away and he makes this post and he puts a post out in the community. He's a known player, like he plays a bit of League of Legends. And he, Actually, I'll rewind that a second. We'll go back to that point, okay? Remember the part where he's kicked out? I'll go back a second. When he was a boy still, though, when he's still living with his family, he was into magic. He loved the idea of these, like, sleight of hand card tricks. And there was a trick called the Doublelift. It's like a trick where you have, like, an ace and you shuffle it into the middle of the deck and then you pop and it's at the top of the deck. It's like a sleight of hand trick where you're whipping up to the top. And it's a great trick if you ever see it, but it requires like mechanical skill, finesse. It looks effortless, but it requires a lot of talent and skill and practice. And you wow people with this mechanical skill when you show it. Now fast forward again. So he gets kicked out of his house. He's this player. He plays on the side, but he's just an okay player at this point in time. When he gets kicked out, he puts his word out to the community like, oh, guys, I've been kicked out of my house. Like, can anyone help me out? And this guy reacts to the post and he says like, yeah, listen, I've got a spare room. You can come and live with me. And that guy eventually goes on to become a famous journalist, and this player starts to get better in teams and gets better offers, and he gets to join the biggest team in North America. He gets to join CLG, the team that's been the champions the year before, 2011, and formerly, early on in the game, were the best team, had the dynasty, Joins this team, and they're the best team. They're all the old legends. And quickly, he becomes the best in his team. He suddenly shines with his mechanical skill in the game, though. Not just mechanical skill in the aspect of that. What's more, how perfect is this? His alias that he's chosen is the Doublelift. It's the mechanical trick. It's the finesse to show off. It's the showmanship for the crowd. And to make something look effortless, to actually be very skilled. And his whole style is cocky. He's trash-talking people. He's getting attention for himself. But then his play is showing that he's really good as well. And he's on this legendary team, but now he's the best player on the team. But the problem is, the old legends are falling off. They're dying away. They're fading out. They're seeming less motivated, or they're not willing to adapt to the new era. And he's there and he's battling and doing as best as he can, but his teammates aren't quite living up to it. But they're the legends. How can he kick them out? How can he demand they leave? He has to hope that they somehow rediscover their game. And his team's always getting close. They're getting top fours. They're getting top two. They're going even with the team that win the tournament. They're coming close to beating the teams that win the tournaments, but they're never winning the international tournament. They're never winning against the top elite teams. They're playing the best teams, but it's always the bad side. And yet he's playing fantastically. And he's never won a LAN with this team. Even though he's playing with the greatest team at that time, he's never won a LAN with them. So I know what you're thinking, right? Does he ever win the LAN? Well, that's the story. I haven't even told you anything about what champions he plays. I haven't even told you what role he plays. I haven't told you anything about the matches that happened or key details of them. And yet the context is already interesting, that if you're a mainstream person, if you tell this story, that's as good as a fucking movie story right there. Think of a movie like Whiplash or something. You don't have to know about anything about drumming to know it was a really compelling movie, do you? And yet these people don't tell the story that way. I've got another one for you. This goes into Starcraft Brood War. So Korean Starcraft Brood War is the most difficult game in history to be very good at, because the skill level is incredibly high, the mechanical component is very demanding, the level of strategy and the understanding of the metagame is incredibly high. There's so much nuance to it, and it takes years to master certain units. In this scene that's the hardest ever, it's so hard that no player has ever won more than 6 of these big championships, and only one guy ever got to 6. A couple got to 5. Had a couple got to 5? No, one got to 5. Another one got to 4. A few got to 3. And so you play maybe 20 of these tournaments in your career, but people have only won 6 max. That's the limit. So along comes this young boy. And like a lot of boys actually at the time, he doesn't have his own PC. He hasn't grown up being a gamer all his life and playing every single game and got that like natural dexterity, hand-eye coordination and dexterity in the fingers and understands like basics of how to play games and game theory and these things. He comes along and like other kids, he starts playing at PC cafes called PC Bongs in Korea. And he starts to get really good at Starcraft. And in no time, something like 6 months, he's scouted for a team. And then he gets onto this team and he proves himself and he gets onto a better team. And then when he's on this team, very quickly, he's starting to show himself to have talent so that he enters his first of these massive tournaments, the ones that only 6 have ever been won by any one person. And in his first ever debut season, he goes all the way to the semi-finals and he loses to the guy who ends up winning that tournament by 1 game. He gets to the 5th game, and in getting to the 5th game, he knocks out a legendary player who at the time is considered the best player in the world, Bisu, this guy who was at the time the MSL champion. He knocks him out in the round of 8 and he cheeses them, and it's awesome. So he's gotten all this way far, and he's only something like 14 years old at the time. It's unreal, the youngest person to ever do this sort of shit. Then the next year, he continues on to develop that talent, and now he's the main carry on his team. He's doing awesome in the team league, and now he goes into a tournament and he gets to the final and he wins. And not only does he wins in the most emphatic fashion, 3-0 sweep. He wins in the shortest final ever played against another of the best players in the world, a guy who's very consistent, a guy called Stork, and he wins, and he's the youngest champion ever. And he's won one of those tournaments that are the 6. And you're thinking, this guy's 15 years old and he's won the tournament. He's going to break that record. He's going to get way more than the 6. If he can win now at 15, imagine him at 17, at 19, at 20. Imagine when he gets to the level of the older pro gamers who are the great ones winning. But that's when tragedy strikes, because for the next couple of years in the main tournaments, the OSL and the MSL, the big tournaments, he's not having any success. Every now and then he might make a round of 8, but that's it, he gets knocked out. His rival, another guy who's come up at the same time called Jaedong's winning everything. That guy's up to 4 or 5 championships. Then suddenly it turns around. This guy, after his slump, after he's had some occasional wins in smaller tournaments that didn't matter, after being a beast in the team league over and over, so that he's proven that he's the main carry and that he definitely has the talent to be the best in the world, but he's never making it in the individual leagues, suddenly it all starts to come together. Now he's not just dominating, he's dominating in a fashion where he's starting to win series, he's starting to beat out everyone, and suddenly it looks like no one can stop him. And he gets to the big final, and he plays his rival, Jaedong, there. And he gets beaten in one of the best series ever. He plays his heart out, but he still loses. And you're thinking, he's never going to win, is he? How is he ever going to win in this scenario? And what's funny is his nickname was the Ultimate Weapon. That's the nickname the fans gave him. Like, just when he was that kid, when he was that young kid getting things together, the Ultimate Weapon, like everything's brilliant. But he isn't, though. He breaks down. He has these moments of dominance, but then he can't continue them on and win the big championship. I guess he's not the Ultimate Weapon, right? He comes back the next season, and he plays in a final against the guy who's never been to a final before. And he's up 2 games out of a best of 5, and he loses 3-2. He loses the final. You think, if he's even going to lose that one, he's never going to be the God champion. He's never going to deliver on that potential of the kid that we saw when we were 15. It's never going to happen. Goes to the next final, and he has to play his rival again, Jaedong. You're like, well, fuck. If he lost last time playing his best, how is he going to win this time? That guy's just too good. That guy's the guy who's going to break all the records. But from that moment onwards, he's in God mode. He beats Jaedong, plays him the next year, beats him in that final, plays him in another final in the same season, beats him in that one. He's beat Jaedong in 3 finals in a row now. Now suddenly, he's up to 5 titles of his own. You only need 6 to be the best ever. He's tying his rival already. Now he is the ultimate weapon. Now he's the master of every race is above 70% win rate. Every race, he's mastering, pioneering, refining the meta game so that everyone is essentially looking at him and figuring out, how do you play against this guy? He has no weaknesses. He can beat everyone. He wins every best of X series. He's a monster in the Pro League. You see where the story, and it does fit his nickname, the Ultimate Weapon. Again, I haven't had to tell you about the specific race he played, what innovations he actually did in the map pool there. I haven't had to put over a fake storyline either, like, oh, he came from a really bad background and all this sort of thing. I've just looked at the story there. I've taken out all the stuff that's unnecessary to know about for the sake of context. But I've given you all the meaningful context, all the human interest that these guys always tell us they want to tell us about. Except these lazy mainstream journalists don't look into that shit, and they don't try to do it, and they try to impose their own lame storyline over the top. Whereas if they'd have actually looked, and they'd have put in the time, and they'd have asked around, and they'd have tried to appreciate what made the games great, and what made the scene great, and the context of why it's important, why it's not just people playing a game, in the same way as the Lakers making the final of the NBA is not just them playing in their own stadium, like, oh, who cares if they win, they play their 40 games a season. No, the finals is pretty different, mate. Has a different weight to it, has a different significance to it. And so when you know that, you know why context matters, why it's important, why it's actually everything, why just playing the game doesn't matter unless you have that context, because it is just playing the game then, but it isn't, is it? We all know that being the champion of 6 of those major leagues that no one else had ever done except one guy makes Flash one of the greatest ever, and how overcoming that slump of when he should have been very good but somehow he couldn't make it, and then when he gets it together it has more meaning to it. The significance is more. Then when he overcomes Jaedong, he's not just beating another Zerg player. Oh, I just beat a Zerg player there, TVZ is my best anyway. No, he's beating the best Zerg player, the guy who has 5 championships, the guy who's knocking on the door becoming the greatest himself. It's a head-to-head of 2 of the greatest players ever in their primes, in the same era, going at it to decide who will have the enduring legacy, and he wins out there. He becomes the ultimate weapon. You can see the context matters in all these scenarios and makes the story better, but without embellishment, without having some artificial fake hype put on over the top. I didn't put in some fake storyline there or misconstrue it as like, oh, and then I guess he got trained by another guy. No, I put in the reality of what happened, and it made the story better than it could have been otherwise. It was better than a movie. The scripting was amazing to the extent that you can't even believe it happened, yet it did. This really happened. So I wish people would just try and at least understand why context is the key word when you're trying to look at esports stories and you're trying to tell those stories.